Good morning. We'll try that again. Good morning. Okay, wonderful, wonderful. My name is Patricia Rellew. I have the honor of serving as the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research in the College of Engineering. And it is my pleasure to welcome all of you here to the fifth in our series of the Technology Takes the Wheel seminar series that focuses on autonomous vehicle technology. Just 1 year ago, AAA reached out to us to discuss hosting an educational event that coincided with the release of a series of TED Talks focusing on autonomous vehicles. As we began to discuss autonomous vehicle technology and all the ways that AV rollout will impact our daily lives, we realized that we needed not a single event, but a series of events to discuss and explore the topic and to educate ourselves, the university, and the Toledo communities. Out of our initial conversation was born a wonderful partnership between AAA and the University of Toledo's College of Engineering, and it's the reason that you are here today for the Technology Takes the Wheel speaker series. So I know that many of you attended our February kickoff, which gave us an overview of the engineering and the technologies that underpin autonomous vehicles. That speaker session was followed in April when we discussed the importance of protecting the communications between vehicles and infrastructure, ensuring the safety and the cybersecurity of the data and information-rich autonomous vehicle ecosystem. In June, we focused on public transportation and autonomous vehicles. We were thrilled to host not only an actual autonomous shuttle bus, but to be the venue where TARDA announced the receipt of federal funding to bring an autonomous shuttle bus to the city of Toledo. This past September, our seminar focused on infrastructure, government regulation, and autonomous vehicles. We were very pleased to have Mr. Jim Barna from Drive Ohio and Mr. Randy Cole from the Ohio Turnpike Commission here to discuss the state's efforts to coordinate and support autonomous vehicle testing and provide an update on these projects statewide. If you would like to review any of these previous seminars, they are all archived on the College of Engineering's website under the Technology Takes the Wheel. Excuse me. Today, we will be addressing one of the most exciting subjects in this series, mobility, accessibility, and autonomous vehicles. We will focus on mobility issues faced by the elderly and disabled segments of our population and how technology may be able to provide the elderly and the differently abled the means to remain active and engaged in the world. We join with our partners in this series, AAA of Northwest Ohio, in celebrating the achievements of fellow engineers and scientists in creating the technologies that will have a significant impact on reducing traffic deaths around the globe, as well as providing mobility to millions who would not otherwise have it. Thank you again for joining us here today. It is my pleasure now to introduce our MC for the event, Ms. Lisa Guyton from 13 ABC News. We have been very fortunate to have Lisa with us for this entire speaker series. Lisa has been a television anchor and reporter for nearly 30 years. She spent the last 15 years working at 13 ABC. Lisa grew up in Perrysburg, Ohio, and graduated from Maumee Valley Country Day. She has a degree in communications from Stevens College in Missouri and is grateful to be doing what she loves in her hometown. She's been covering the auto beat for more than a decade, and of course a lot of the recent coverage has focused on connected and autonomous vehicles. Lisa also reports on many animal, business, and human interest stories for the station, and she describes herself as being fiercely loyal to the city, and she's proud to be involved with events like Technology Takes the Wheel. In her free time, Lisa volunteers for a number of charitable organizations in the community, and she also spends much of her spare time with Real Horsepower. She's been an avid equestrian since she began riding horses at the age of 4. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Guyton.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. It really has been an honor and a privilege to be part of this series from the start, and such important and impactful work is being done, and Ohio really is in the forefront of it, and so I am very proud to be here. And I've learned so much. As you hear, I've covered the auto beat for many years, but things are changing and quickly. And so I have learned an awful lot in my time here on the stage, so I'm grateful for being able to be part of this, so thank you to everyone who made that happen. And there are an awful lot of people who work very hard behind the scenes, and I think we should give all of them a round of applause as well, because it takes a lot to put this together. So thank you very much. And I want to remind all of you as well to write questions down on the index card and then hand them to the helpers who will be walking through the auditorium during the panel discussion later on. And please hold all of your questions until then. But your questions are really a critical part of this, and that's how we learn a lot. So please, write as many questions as you have, and we will hopefully get them answered for you. The first speaker in our lineup today is Dr. Lisa Molnar. She's an associate research scientist in the Behavioral Sciences Group, UMTRI, and the associate director of UMTRI and the Center for Advancing Transportation Leadership and Safety, the Atlas Center. Dr. Molnar's research has focused primarily on traffic safety and driver behavior. Specific topics of interest include older driver safety and mobility, the use of vehicle technology to improve driver safety, behavioral effects and safety outcomes associated with traffic laws, policies, and programs. In the area of older driver safety and mobility, she has led or currently leads projects on better understanding how changes in cognitive, perceptual, and psychomotor abilities can affect driving behavior and what can be done to maintain safe driving. She also recently led a project examining age differences in the transfer of control between manual and automated driving in an automated vehicle. Dr. Molnar is a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America and a past convener of GSA's Transportation and Aging Interest Group. She holds a BA in Sociology from Michigan State University, a Master of Health Science Services Administration in Public Health Policy and Administration from the University of Michigan, and a PhD, to top it all off, from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, in public health with an emphasis on road safety. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Molnar.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, to be able to be part of this series on Technology Takes the Wheel. And I'm going to be talking this morning about the implications of advances in vehicle technology and vehicle automation for aging adults, particularly in terms of safety and mobility and accessibility. As was mentioned, I'm from UMTRI at the University of Michigan. We were founded over 50 years ago as an independent institute in the University of Michigan environment to pursue research in a multidisciplinary fashion on transportation safety and mobility. And so you can see here is our building in Ann Arbor and some of our facilities. We have a number of groups at UMTRI. Many of them are primarily involved in kind of the engineering aspects of the transportation system. So we have an engineering group. We have a driver interface group that also looks at engineering issues. We have an automotive group that looks at trends in the automotive industry. I'm actually part of the behavioral sciences group at UMTRI. And so what we do primarily is study driver behavior and broader road user behavior and decision making, but we look at that within the context of the broader environment in which drivers and road users function. So we're very much interested in the vehicle and technologies within the vehicle. We're interested in roadway infrastructure and how that affects driving and driving safety. And then we also take into account a variety of kind of behavioral issues like psychosocial functioning, the social context within which driving occurs, and so forth. And what I think a lot of people have come to recognize is that even with vehicle technology, there's always a human element. So it's really important to understand the behavioral issues. So our work has increasingly involved looking at aging adults in the population. And one of the reasons for this increased focus really stems from, I think, what most people recognize as a clear trend in the United States and elsewhere, and that is the aging of our society. So when you look at this slide, it shows kind of what we call the squaring of the pyramid. So in 1960, when you looked at the age distribution in our population, it was very much weighted toward the lower ages. So, and then as you got to the older ages, there were very fewer proportions of people. There's really been a sea change, and so by the year 2060, we expect to have really much more of this pillar effect, where the biggest increases in aging will be at the upper levels, and the highest rates of increase will be among what we consider to be the oldest old, those people who are 80 and above. So given this aging of the population, there's been really an increasing interest in looking at transportation within the context of aging in society. And as people age, we know from a variety of studies that people do continue to drive. This slide shows results from one of the University of Michigan's longitudinal studies called the Health and Retirement Study. It's the longest running longitudinal study in the United States. It follows a large group of drivers over many, many years. And this is data, these are data from just one wave of the study, but it shows that fully 78% of people surveyed report that they are driving, and that they do drive not just on short trips, but they also take long trips. So I think, particularly in areas where there aren't good options for getting around other than driving oneself, driving is the preferred means of getting around, not just for aging adults, but for people in general. And that's because driving, or at least having ways of getting around in the community, enable people to not only do the things that are necessary for daily living, shopping, going to the doctor, and so forth, but staying actively engaged in the community in a meaningful way. And so this slide shows some of the things that people do. I point out the lower left, even getting involved in tailgating at U of M football games, which is a big activity in Ann Arbor, where I'm from. And so I think it's really not surprising that people who report still driving also report higher levels of life satisfaction. And again, these are data that came from the Health and Retirement Study from the 2012 wave. Now, we know from a number of studies that have been conducted over many, many years that when people have to stop driving, there are often adverse consequences associated with that. So people feel a sense of loss in terms of their independence, their mobility. We know that a number of studies have shown that people who stop driving exhibit increased symptoms of depression. There's an increased risk of having to go into a nursing home. And even when we control for health at the time of driving cessation, studies have shown that there's an acceleration in the decline in health following driving cessation. At the same time, we know that as people age, they often become more susceptible to medical conditions that can cause declines in driving-related abilities that are necessary for safe driving. And we tend to think of these abilities kind of in three groups: cognitive abilities, visual abilities, and psychomotor abilities. But I think it is important to point out that it's really these abilities and declines in the abilities that affect or compromise safe driving. It's not age per se. And that's really gotten a lot of press because there are often calls to say, oh, when people reach a certain age, we should just take their license away. But there's been a lot of research that shows that, number one, that's not effective, but number two, that's really not the issue. It's not age per se, it's what's happening to people's abilities as they confront increasing medical conditions, and also the medications that are used to treat these conditions. So when we look at crash rates overall, this is for the United States, we find what we call the U-shaped curve, such that young novice drivers are at high risk for fatal crashes. And then crashes kind of stabilize through the middle years, but we see an upturn starting at about age 70. And this is due in part to these declines in abilities that I spoke about. For aging adults, it's also due to increased frailty and fragility that's associated with aging. But because of all of these issues that I've been talking about, our research on aging drivers at UMTRI has really come to focus on three goals that we try to pursue in the research that we do. So the first goal is to really help enable people to continue driving as long as they can safely do so. The second goal is that when people start to have problems, we really want to try to find effective ways to help smooth or facilitate the transition from driving to non-driving. And then finally, for people who are unable to drive or who choose not to drive for a variety of reasons, we want to be able to ensure that there are other community mobility options available for them. So increasingly, our research has focused on vehicle automation because of the promise, I think, that it really holds for improving transportation safety, mobility, and quality of life. At the same time, we know that at least in the early stages of vehicle automation, the human driver is going to be an integral component of the system. So I've been to a number of conferences and meetings lately where people are saying that really the full deployment of fully automated vehicles is probably still about 20 to 25 years away, even though we already have some, semi-autonomous systems in vehicles. There are a lot of challenges ahead before we have widespread deployment. And so I think Brian Reimer from MIT, I think, had a very good quote that, at least in the foreseeable future, automated vehicle technology will continue to rely on a human driver to kind of oversee the technology, and will have to sometimes step in and take control and make decisions. So in thinking about the challenges that really confront automation, I think it's instructive to look at some of the experiences with automation that come from the field of aviation. Nadine Sarter, who's an engineer at the University of Michigan, has done a lot of work looking at crashes and adverse events involving airplanes and the transfer of control back to pilots. And I think she's made some really interesting observations that we can think about in terms of vehicle automation as well. So feedback can be difficult to interpret, and it may be that drivers, who are given a lot of information, are going to become overloaded. And often people only will get feedback once a problem has occurred. And so transfer of control may be given back to people in a very degraded state, where they have to step in and make quick decisions without adequate information. We also know that in a situation with automation, people may kind of become out of the loop, or they may lack situational awareness when they have to step in and take back control. So this is a challenge as well. Issues of trust really kind of become important, because you need to have an alignment of trust so that you're not over-trusting or under-trusting the technology in your vehicle. And this is already an issue that we see with advanced vehicle systems in vehicles currently. So I think one of the observations that's been made that we really need to think about is that these challenges are more than just technical. It's not just an issue of developing a technology that's robust enough, but ultimately people have to use these systems, they have to accept them, they have to have trust in them. And so I think that's where the behavioral piece really becomes important. And then for aging drivers in particular, we know that physical and cognitive impairments can really exacerbate the challenges that are associated with accessibility for these vehicles. So beyond just thinking about vehicle automation, I think most of us recognize that there's really been a sea change in terms of the kinds of mobility services and paradigms that are available. So we now have Uber and we have Lyft and we have other forms of car sharing and ride hailing. And in fact, there's a lot of confusion about what all these terms mean, and people define them differently. But again, they hold the promise of really extending mobility for major segments of the population, including aging adults. At the same time, we know that there are challenges particularly for aging adults for using these services. So for example, many of the services require access either to the internet or more often a smartphone. And we know that among older adults in particular, access to and use of these technologies may be more limited than other segments of the population. We also know from the traditional kind of group of mobility services that are currently available for aging adults, that there are often challenges associated with making these services what we call senior friendly. So services need to be affordable, they need to be available, they need to be accessible, adaptable, acceptable. And so there are increasing efforts to really focus on how to make mobility services transportation friendly for older adults. And this has grown into a larger movement of kind of smart communities, smart and connected communities, and how to make services within the community senior friendly as well. And unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about that, but we've been doing a lot of research in this area as well. So this slide just kind of illustrates one of the challenges I was talking about, having access to a smartphone. And what it shows is that, for example, smartphone use among aging adults is lower than, I think, other age groups, but also as age increases, that use goes down, at least among the current cohort of aging adults. Now things may change as the baby boomers, who have kind of grown up more with technology and with vehicles, actually age into older adulthood. But these are the current statistics. And when you ask seniors about needing help, you'll find also that older people are more likely to express a need for assistance in using technologies. So these are real challenges that we face in getting widespread use of even the emerging mobility paradigms. So I thought I would just end by very briefly talking about a couple of projects that we've been involved in at UMTRI that focus on either vehicle automation or advanced vehicle technology, but kind of within the framework of aging adult mobility and accessibility. So the first is a project that I led on looking at the age differences in the transfer of control between automated and manual driving. This is a study that was funded by the Mobility Transformation Center at the University of Michigan, which is now called Emcee. And Emcee is essentially a connected and automated vehicle test bed that's just adjacent to our building at UMTRI. And so for this project, what we did, this was a simulator project. We programmed our driving simulator at UMTRI to simulate automated driving. We recruited people in 3 age groups. We were particularly interested in comparing young novice drivers and aging adults with a control group of middle-aged adults. We had them come in and drive in the simulator. We had various scenarios that prompted transfer of control from an automated to a manual driving mode. So for example, we might have a police car on the side of the road, or a crash on the side of the road, or an inoperable traffic light, scenarios that one might reasonably expect if you had automation that you might have to give control back to the driver in these situations. And so we were particularly interested not just in how people manage that process, so we had a variety of objective driving data measures that we looked at, but we were also interested in the experience, from their perceptions about the experience, their trust in the automation, and so forth. And so we did in-depth interviews after each drive in the simulator. And so we were also interested in whether people's past experience with technology more generally affected their trust in the automation and their acceptance. We were also interested in people's preferences for control, both kind of generally in life, but more specifically in a driving context. So we asked people, how comfortable were they with giving up control and letting someone else drive the vehicle, for example. And we were interested in whether that helped predict the extent to which people might trust the automation. And so another study that's currently going on is one that's being funded through the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. This is a large-scale longitudinal cohort study that's taking place in 5 states across the U.S. I'm the principal investigator for the Michigan site. Collectively, we have 3,000 drivers, so that's 600 in each of the 5 sites. And this is a really exciting study because it's really the first study of this kind in the United States to follow a very large group of drivers over time. Right now we're planning to have at least 5 years of data for each driver. Hopefully we'll be able to extend that. But also what's exciting is that we're collecting a comprehensive set of health and driving data. In particular, we're collecting objective driving data that we're gathering through data loggers that are installed in people's vehicles. And so we have a wealth of objective driving measures that we can get from that, including things like hard braking, we can get speeding events, so we can get certain surrogates for safety, and then a lot of data on driving exposure and driving patterns. And we have, I think we have well over 10 million miles of driving and millions of trips, and so we're just starting to really analyze all of these data. And then we also have questionnaires that we administer. One is on vehicle technology. So we're learning a lot about how people think about, use, and understand advanced technology in their vehicles currently. And then we also have people bring in all their medications so we know what they're taking. We pull their crash records and driving history records from the state, so we have objective data on their crashes as well. So essentially, what we're really trying to do is understand kind of this intersection between driving and health, vehicle technologies, and to try to figure out what is the best way to really facilitate continued safe driving for aging adults. We have a number of publications that have come out of this study. These are available on the AAA Foundation website. And then in addition to these reports, we're now starting to generate a lot of peer-reviewed papers for journals, and so those are going to be very interesting as well. And then the final initiative I wanted to talk about, I think it's worth mentioning because when we talk about issues of safety and mobility for aging adults, we're not just interested in aging adults themselves, but we're interested in all of the various stakeholders, who interact with aging adults and have an opportunity to help influence and promote safety and mobility. So we're talking about the families and friends of aging adults. We're talking about physicians and law enforcement and other healthcare professionals and aging professionals. And so working with the state of Michigan, the Michigan Department of Transportation and the Michigan Department of State, UMTRI led a project to come up with a statewide strategy for really supporting the needs of older adults in the state. And that culminated in a website that it's not just I think focused on Michigan, but I think it could be a really good resource for other states as well, that has evidence-based strategies for improving safety and mobility for aging adults. So I think that's all I have in the time that I had today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And our next speaker today is Mr. Dan Wilkins. Dan is the Director of Special Projects for the Ability Center of Greater Toledo. Dan is an outspoken advocate, storyteller, and visionary for people living with disabilities and the disability culture. He is a dad, husband, friend, chair user, artist, writer, graphic designer, humorist. This is my favorite part. He's a Browns fan. I have company.
It's my biggest disability.
I'm a long-suffering Browns fan, so, but hey, we're loyal, right? And that's an important trait. He's also a million other things and a true asset to this community. Now, since 1989, he has been sharing stories and ideas in workshops, breakouts, keynotes, and roundtables, formal and informal, for students from preschool, the toughest crowd of all, he says, to doctorate, parents, professionals in business, human services and allied health, educators and administrators, and folks with disabilities on a broad range of topics, from disability and diversity awareness, advocacy, and self-advocacy, to the importance of humor, inclusion, community, and seen through bigger eyes. Please join me in welcoming Dan Wilkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so I don't break my neck again, I'll have to be spinning around a lot here to see what's going on. Just give me just a second here. Perfect, thank you. Yep, awesome. Quad trick. Just so I got that if I need it. Oh, that's gonna be dangerous. All right, maybe I just don't take the top off, unless I need it. That's all right, we're good. Oh, yeah. Okay, so the right button gets me to the next slide, right? Okay. I want to start with just a little thought thing here. Let me get this out of here. Just imagine walking or rolling, as the case may be, out of your home, either by plan or by whim, climbing into a car. It might be your car, it might be a friend's car, it might be a taxi, traveling to your destination. It could be you're going to school or to work, to a doctor's appointment, or to a bar downtown to watch the Browns with your friends. And that is my biggest disability. It's not my broken neck. I'm a Browns fan. That's my biggest disability. So how many in here have done something like that in the last 24 hours? Kind of a trick question. We've all done it. We did it this morning, and here we are. So we're all, but I just want you to know that for a lot of people that I know, doing this is not so easy. For some, it's virtually impossible without planning or calling ahead, sometimes days ahead. And for many, there is no whim at all in life for folks like that as far as getting places real quickly. On behalf of the board and staff of the Ability Center and people we serve and support, I wish to thank Patty and Diana and University of Toledo and Edgar and Bob and Cindy and AAA, Edgar in particular for including my voice in this conversation. We live in a time of exponential technological advancement, creating almost daily breakthroughs and products which can greatly improve the quality and quantity of life for millions of disabled people across the country and around the world. I think to maximize these benefits, I believe it is imperative that people with disabilities are at the table as early as possible in the process to share their realities, their issues, their ideas, and their wisdom. If they're not there, everything is assumption. Changes we've made are not made based solely upon speculation, upon stereotypes, sometimes even upon stigma, but not on reality and not on real life need. There's a danger then of leaving behind an already marginalized group of people. Let me just pop this slide. So I'm here today as a representative of this large, diverse, growing, and yes, marginalized culture of people, the disability culture, to share with you a bit about disability, what I know so far anyway, and my thoughts on the potential benefits of autonomous vehicle technology on the lives and quality lives of all of us. To help me get a feel for the room, can I see a show of hands? How many of you in here grew up with somebody in your life that lived differently? Grandma, grandpa, brother, sister, mom, dad? A lot of us. How many of you in here went to grade school with kids with disabilities? A lot of us, cool. How many of you in here have friends with disabilities? Cool, nice to see so many hands. How many in here have a disability besides me? You want to come out of the closet? Good time to do that. Safe place. Yeah, not many. How many of you are wearing glasses or contacts and don't have your hands up, or hearing aids? Yeah, welcome to the club. You're one of us. See me after the show. I'll get you a card and a T-shirt. Welcome to the club. So I always like to do that because at the Ability Center we don't see a delineation between disabled and non. We don't see it as an us and them sort of thing. So many people do, and that's just a social construct that we've developed as human beings. But we see disability as something that is a natural part of the life process. Some of us are born with our disabilities. Some of us acquire them at a very young age. Some of us acquire them, rolling our Camaros when we're 23, 10 foot tall and bulletproof. But as we age, things change. We've talked about that. Lisa was talking about that just a little bit with regard to aging and the changes that happen that affect driving. So disability happens. One last question. This is kind of a rhetorical one. When somebody mentions disability to you, where does your mind go? When you hear of a friend's child being born with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, or a friend's spouse or a parent acquiring a disability, where does your mind go? Does it go in a positive direction? Do you begin to think about all the possibilities the future holds for that child or that spouse? Or does it go toward the negative, where you begin to consider all that person will never be able to do? Will you compare or contemplate new and future potential? Or do you begin to tally limitations? He'll never do this, or he'll never be that. How you answer depends on who you know and what you know, disability-wise, what you've been through yourself, who you grew up with, went to school with, as we were just talking, who you now know and hang out with. For those people in the world, and there's a lot of us with little or no connection to disability, all we have to go on is what we think we know about disability. What we've heard, seen in movies, read in books. And we often go toward the negative. It's just what we do. And we take all the baggage that we carry about what it must be like for that guy or that kid or that spouse, and we slump it squarely on their shoulders. It isn't fair, it isn't right, and it isn't even real. Even with a 28-year-old law guaranteeing us civil rights and access to all that our communities have to offer, our biggest barriers remain this pervasive social mindset, what I call a paradigm of low expectations. We see this in education, we see this in employment, in the inaccessibility still existing in a community 28 years after a law banning such inaccessibility. We see it in store parking lots in the winter. Where do they push the snow when it snows a lot? Often they push it into the accessible spaces. You can always tell when there's a driver of a plow that thinks, those people don't go out in this kind of weather, do they? You know what I mean? So there's already that low expectation. We see it in the fact that none of us really want to admit that we have a disability or that we may acquire a disability somewhere down the road as we age. We don't even want to admit that we're getting old. Nobody wants to admit that. I think it's why OXO didn't do well with their good grips early on, because they didn't market it. They marketed it to people with arthritis and stuff like that, and I'm not buying that. You know, that's just kind of the way we are. I've seen it in my life personally on several occasions. I could, if I had the time, I would love to share some stories with you, but I'll just sum it up to say I've had a woman behind me say, "Oh, look at that poor man. He must have a horrible life." You know, and what? All she's seeing is my chair. You know, I had a woman come up to me in Franklin Park Mall. I was rolling through the mall at Christmas time with my son on my lap in what I call the Captain Kirk seat. My son was like not quite 2, and we're rolling through the mall on our way down. This was old Franklin Park, you know, Lion store way down there, food court, all that. So we were flying through, and a woman just had the angle on me, like they say in football. She kind of headed me off and asked me about my child. Is that your child? You know, my response to her was, well, you know, if you hurry, there's a great big bin right in front of Penny's, but they're going fast. But what I said was, no, this is my son Taylor. Taylor's somebody I don't even know, you know. And then I thought that was going to be all. She goes, well, we've been trying to adopt, and we're wondering, we haven't been successful. We're wondering how you're able to adopt given that you're disabled. So she was looking at me as someone who must have adopted this child, not as a sexual being. So the story is much longer and funnier, but so I remember coming back from a keynote in Seattle. I was in the Minneapolis airport. This is back in the late 90s when there was not a kiosk, a Starbucks kiosk in every concourse. I was sitting outside of a real coffee house. With, you know, the big white cup with the blue stripe, having my coffee in the concourse next to my bag, because you don't stray from your bags at the airport. And I'm sitting there having my coffee, and out of nowhere comes this lady. She comes up and she puts $5 in my coffee cup and keeps on walking. It's like, what do you do, right? I said, all right, beer money, you know. So she came back and she stood in front of me like she's my mom, and she said, are you really going to buy beer with that? I said, hell yeah, it's like manna from heaven. I didn't have it 5 seconds ago. She goes, I did not give it to you to buy beer. I said, well, let's talk about that for a minute. Why did you give it to me? She said, well, you just look like you could use it. So I told her, you know, if you knew how much money I just made doing this keynote in Seattle, yeah, you probably wouldn't give me the $5, you know, but I know what you're trying, if you want to help me, and I know that's what you're trying to do here, is why don't you take this $5, buy me another cup of coffee, because I'm not going to drink this one, and it cost me about $5. You know, so she did. She came back. We had more conversation about appearances and assumptions, and hopefully she went away a little more enlightened. But this is the stuff we deal with all the time. It's like I got this new chair. It's my first chair that I've actually got push handles on because, okay, I'm getting older and I don't like pushing all the time. And sometimes it's nice to have somebody give me a push. But I got handles that fold in, because you know what happens when you have push handles on your wheelchair? People push you. That's what my friend Norman Kuntz out in Vancouver calls an unexpected attack of help. You know? My friend Mike in Chicago calls them do-gooders. Those people are do-gooders. They just got to do good. They're out to do good, and you're it. So, you know, that's the stuff that's out there. And I've had parents pull their kids away from me in the malls. Kids trying to ask me questions like, hey, mister, what does this do? Or how do you go to the bathroom? Or are you dead? You know, kids ask great questions. Hopefully you get to give them a real answer before what happens? Mom or dad yanks them away by the arm, you know. I always tell them, hey, don't yank your kid away by the arm like that, because their arm's going to get really long. And then kids will be asking them questions in the mall, like, hey, mister, why is your arm so long? Stuff like that. So this paradigm is out there, and it's based on old myths, based on stereotypes, fear of the other, because of the little to no connection that we share in the world or the interactions. I'll circle back to this in a little bit. I think my thing fell on the floor, but I think I'm okay. So let's look at some numbers real quick. 74.1 million baby boomers, 22.9% of the population. That's how many we've got out there right now as of 2015, I think was this study. That's a lot of people, a lot of folks. Of them, 1/3 are now 65 or older. And so what that does is that leaves us with 50 million who are approaching 60 and 65. And as we know, and as Lisa attended to, things start changing. You know, we can't reach, we can't see so much. My son comes up and shows me something on his iPhone, and he has to hand it to me because I got to get it at that exact focal length where I can see it. You know what I mean? Just the way it is. Life's like that. So, you know, those of you that are wearing glasses, you might need those glasses like I need the chair to drive, to do your activities of daily living, that sort of thing. So, a whole lot of people getting older. We also add to that 56.7 million people with disabilities. Now, this is from 2010 study, or the census, and that's 19%. I think we're well over the 20% by now in this last 8 years. So we're looking at 56 to 60 million folks with disabilities out there, on top of this huge population. And I think we can all agree that, I don't know if it's a scientific term, but that's a crap load of disability now and coming in the very near future. And so what are we going to do about that? These are millions of people who may benefit greatly from autonomous vehicle technology, as long as it is accessible and works for them. Let's break down that 56.7 just a little bit here. Now, these are the 50 to 60 million identified as disabled. And we in disability advocacy, we know that the number always thrown around for how many of them are chair users is right around 10%. So, and a quick aside here, this is why there's always been heated debate about the international access symbol being so exclusionary by design, you know, by highlighting a person in the wheelchair as your symbol of disability, and it only representing 10% of the population that needs it, it creates another layer of hassle for the 90% of people with disabilities who don't use chairs, especially when they're accosted in parking lots by well-meaning folks saying, you can't park there, that's for people in wheelchairs. You know, I've seen that a million times. I remember this little old lady getting out of a spot next to me at Anderson's in Maumee, and you know, I had just rolled out on my lift to come down, and she whipped into the next spot. Well, my lift kind of goes out as it goes down, so I just stayed up there to let her get out of her car. She's like 80, just like Aunt B, you know. She gets out of her car, and there's a guy walking by, going into Anderson's, and he looks at me sitting there on the lift, and he looks at her getting out of the car, and she's ambulatory, but like octogenarian. She's getting out of her car, and he looks at me, and he decides he's going to advocate for me. He says, hey, lady, you can't park there. That's for people like him in wheelchairs. And I'm thinking, oh, I better advocate for her and say something about, no, it's not really just for people in wheelchairs, it's for everybody that has a blue card or a plate or whatever, that have reasons to park there. But before I can say anything, she chooses to advocate for herself. She goes up and gets in his face. She's all like 4'9", and she goes, listen, bucko, she says, I've had 5 bypass surgeries in the last 3 years. I can park here. And she just dared him to say something to her. And so she walks away, and he looks at me, and he goes, I just came to buy nails. I just came to buy nails. So I talked to him a little bit about the access symbol and all of that. So, you know, that's just a little aside there. So it's not just for chair users. So about 6 million people out there use chairs to ambulate. Some will have use of their arms and hands. A lot of us don't. Some of us are you know, have a better side and a worse side with our disabilities, all of that stuff. So, you know, this in my mind poses a real problem for the developers of autonomous vehicles. You know, once in a lift-equipped autonomous vehicle, how does one secure themselves? How does one secure their chair and their person independently if there's no driver or nobody there to do that for them? There is no standard across chair designs. Every chair is different from every other chair company. Wheels are different, you know, frames are different, everything. So there is no, I believe, a universal lockdown device that will work for every chair or every person. So something to think about as we move along. Of the 56 million people with disabilities, according to this study, 30.6 million had difficulty walking or climbing stairs. And that's one of the things that you have to realize, too, is that 7 out of 10 people in their lifetime, according to an old Dow study, will have difficulty negotiating a set of stairs at some time in their life, either temporarily or permanently. So these are a lot of folks, that are out there. And this doesn't really even include the non-disabled boomers who have similar issues. These are just the people that claim disability. So there's a lot of people out there that have difficulty walking distances. So it's another one of the things that folks need to consider when developing pickup and drop-off strategies for autonomous vehicles, the distance to the door, the path of travel, all of that stuff. So for as long as I've been a disabled person and an advocate, in every community needs assessment I've ever looked at, going back to the 70s, there have always been the same or similar issues noted, what I call the Big Eight. And in no particular order, we have education. If ever there was a shining example of the paradigm of low expectation, it is education. Because you look at the education system we have in America, at least early education and secondary education, you have two big boxes. You have regular ed and you have special ed. And what we do, we tell our children when we're taking them to the school, you're going to love it, you're going to make all kinds of friends, you're going to learn all kinds of great stuff, all of that. But when we get there, because you have these two big boxes, what are we forced to do? Some professional is forced to test our child to find out which box they go in. Do they go into the regular ed box or do they go into the special ed box? If they go into the regular ed box, well, the world is their oyster. There's college track, there's all kinds of stuff. You're expected to become great leaders, you're expected to do great things. But if you go into the special education box, unless you have a phenomenal, well, first off, they keep whittling on you until you get your own box, your IEP, your individualized education plan. But unless you have a phenomenal parent who's very progressive and didn't buy the premise that this is all you'll ever be or ever do as a disabled child, or a phenomenally progressive educator, or a great administration on board in the school, all of that, not so much as far as the oyster. You're not really expected to become something great. You're not expected to, they're just getting you through school. They don't teach you, right now there's a lot of talk about soft skills, learning how to take tests, learning how to befriend other people in public, learning how to believe in yourself, learning how to organize things, all of these soft skills. They'll teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic, but by the time they get out of school, they have what I refer to as a social retardation. They haven't been included in all the reindeer games. You know what I mean? They've just been more or less babysat through school. So when they get to transitional age, they're not really ready for school or for life. So that's the biggest, and that's all because of that paradigm of low expectation that's out there. So what we have because of that is a 24% of adults with disabilities lack a high school diploma. Some in special education still even just get certificates. And this is twice the number of the non-disabled population. We have employment. 9.2 unemployment rate for people with disabilities according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's twice the rate of non-disabled people. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, Census Bureau Current Population Survey, Annual Social and Economic Supplement of 2015, people with disabilities aged 25 to 64 had a 27% employment rate, 3% of them were unemployed, and a full 70% weren't even in the workforce. And you juxtapose that against able-bodied folks, you had a 77% employment rate, a 4% unemployment rate, and only 19% were not in the workforce. And from the Ruderman white paper that I read, there could be a fully additional 2 million people with disabilities employed if we had autonomous vehicles or trustworthy vehicles to pick them up every day and get them where they need to be in their work. But you also see that the employment is tied to education. If you don't get the education, how do you get the job? If you don't get the skill, how do you get the job? So those are kind of tied. The next big one for people with disabilities is poverty. 1 in 4 people with disabilities, 28% are 18 to 64 live in poverty right now. And that's because there's no jobs. No jobs because of no schooling, all of that stuff. And because of that paradigm, I don't want to hire, we don't know, all the reasons that people don't want to hire that guy, So we've got people with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty compared to people without disabilities, and that's a 21% compared to 12%. rate, and that's according to the census, the last census we had. Next, we have housing. Do you realize that only 1% of America's housing stock is accessible right now to people with disabilities? Only 1%. It's very small. Toledo has issues just like every other city. Less than 5% of the housing stock right now currently could be easily adapted, so it could work for somebody. There are a few options beyond institutional or what we call special settings, subsidized settings, what a lot of us have long referred to as wheelchair ghettos, places where that's where they live is over there. You're really limited to where you can live. So that's housing. Healthcare. Only 1%, 11 million, according to the Ruderman White Paper, 11 million people missed appointments last year, medical appointments, due to transportation issues. That's a lot of 11 million missed appointments, however many people that was, but it's 11 million missed appointments. And they also go on to say that $19 billion would be saved through prevention, preventative care, and early detection if these appointments were actually made. So you also have then attitudes and awareness, and I think anybody you talk to with a disability, you ask them what the biggest barriers are to people with disabilities, and they're going to say, well, attitudes. You know, it's the people that come up and say, what happened to you? First thing they say, what's your problem? You know, we get that a lot as people with disabilities. So attitudes out there need to change, and it changes through awareness, and I'll talk about that in a little bit here. I'm also going to throw up there socialization. I'll talk about that in a few minutes more in depth. And then the last one of the big 8 is, of course, transportation. And I put that last because it's the only one tied to and affecting every other one. If you can't get to school, you can't get a diploma. If you can't get to work on a daily basis, on time, all the time, you don't have a job. You know, if you're looking for other housing options, they might be farther out in the burbs. They're not available to you if you don't have transportation, reliable transportation. So these are all some of the things. And you know, transportation, that's something that we with disabilities have been hip to for a long, long time. Here are a couple of shots of, that would be LA over there, and this is St. Louis here in the 80s, 83 and 89, when we with disabilities were always out there fighting the APTA. We were at every one of their conventions and all that, protesting to just put some lifts on buses. You know, people say, Dan, what is it that you've learned from being disabled all these years? And I have to tell them that, you know, for me, it's, as Lisa said, seeing through bigger eyes. You know, I grew up white, male, living in America. I never knew oppression. You know, I was raised to love and respect all people, so I supported civil rights. I supported women's rights. I supported gay and lesbian rights, but none of them ever touched me until I rolled my Camaro, and suddenly I'm having to come in back doors or through loading docks or through kitchens. You know, for me, it's a different drinking fountain, a different bathroom that I have to use. All of this stuff, for me, it wasn't front of the bus or back of the bus. We couldn't even get on the damn bus. So suddenly Dr. King was speaking to me, and Marion Wright Edelman and Gloria Steinem and all these people. So now I know what it's like to be oppressed. I don't like it, and I want to get back to where I blended in. You know, that's just what we all want as people with disabilities, is to blend in. So this is all big picture stuff, and it's all the processes and statistical minutia of living life in the world today, issues faced by millions of Americans, upon which autonomous and accessible vehicles can make a positive impact. But I want to close by addressing something much deeper, something impacting on and impacted by all of this, these big 8, and more important, it's way more important. It's life and death important. You know, as I look around the room, you know, we all appear to be different in this room, but we are in many ways, but we are also we have very much in common. We all want to feel safe. We all want, you know, all the Maslowian stuff. We all want a place to call home. We all want to be loved. We all want to be respected. We all want to have friends. We all want to belong to something bigger, a church, a university, a family, whatever. We all want to feel welcome. We all want to contribute and share our talents and our skills for the betterment of our communities. We want to give back. I think that's something we all want to have in our lives. But there's this perceived social isolation that exists out there. And, it's just another word, sociological word for loneliness. And so I want to talk a little bit about loneliness. When we think about loneliness, some of the research being done around loneliness, approximately 42.6 million adults over the age of 45 in the United States are estimated to be suffering from chronic loneliness. Another one that I found that this is a great quote: loneliness and social isolation may represent a greater public health hazard than obesity, and their impact is growing and will continue to grow. What we know about loneliness is that it affects us. It affects our bodies. It affects us greatly. It changes the endorphins in our brain. It changes our immune system so that it sets up a whole lot of other stuff, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. It can undermine one's ability to regulate one's body. It can lead to higher stress levels and inflammation, increased chances of high blood pressure, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, dementia, even suicide. All of this can come from being lonely. Now, we talked about social isolation and loneliness. A lot of people see them as two different things. Andrew Steptoe, professor of epidemiology and public health at the University of College London, defines social isolation as a kind of objective indicator of sorts of social contacts people have in the world. How often do you interact with others? How often do you get out and connect with people, with family, friends, groups, that sort of thing? Loneliness, he says, is a more subjective experience. It's a feeling of being, of lacking companionship, possibly lacking intimate feelings with other people. So independently and together, they can have this huge impact on well-being. The increased potential for health problems and mortality brought on by loneliness and social isolation is really staggering. They say when you connect with people, it's like quitting smoking. It has that big of an effect on people. So you add to this the 11 million missed appointments due to transportation. We're talking a huge and dangerous impacts on our population. So just briefly touch on social capital. Author, professor, and friend of mine, Al Condalucci at Pitt, he states social capital refers to the connections and relationships that develop around community and the value of these relationships hold for the members. Like physical capital, that is the tools used by communities, or human capital, the people power brought to a situation, social capital is the value brought on by the relationships. Other sociologists suggest that social capital is enhanced by social currency. So this idea is how social fodder links people together. For example, a popular person who is the life of a party might be regularly included in activities. To this extent, he is strong in social capital. His jokes and his storytelling, the items that make him popular, are the social currency that he exchanges. Derek Dufresne, friend of mine in St. Louis, he speaks of social circles that we have around us, each of us. We are surrounded by these social circles, and all the people in our lives fit into the various strata. Closest to you, obviously, are family, then there are friends. Outside of that, maybe coworkers, other people that you know that you see all the time. Further out are doctors and the librarian and the bus driver and the people that are in your life, kind of sporadically. And the intimacy gets smaller, gets less as you move out on that circle. So if you think about the many communities to which you are involved individually, your family, your work team, your church, your clubs, your organizations, all of that, you're surrounded by people who are different from you in one way, in many ways, but they are there for you on a different level because of the common purpose or belief that brings you together in that organization or that group. with the people on the closer levels, the family, friends, those folks, you laugh together, you cry together, you're sharing social capital and social currency, and this releases endorphins and helps you to mitigate some of those health issues that we were talking about. You help each other out because you know each other, and you know each other because you know of each other, and you're connected. So you're connected because you can be connected. That's a part of this whole autonomous thing. Is a lot of people are isolated, not by choice, but by lack of opportunity to be connected. So there's all of that out there. Sociologists talk about this helpfulness that we have for each other as a social reciprocity, and that as social beings, it is as important to our survival as air and water. We need people in our lives. We need to be connected. Well, dang, I just blew that. So, there's this guy at Oxford. So, how many people does the average person have in his or her life? Pretend you didn't see that slide. 140. Yeah. Well, Robin Dunbar, he's an Oxford professor. He said that we have about, our brains are able to keep in there about 150 people. And these are people that we might interact with, not all the time, but we might look at our Facebook pages and say, yeah, I've got 800 friends, or I've got 1,000 friends. But you don't really. These are not all people that you're going to hang out with and talk to all the time. They're not people that are part of your life, essential to life. So, but they say that the average person in the world has 150 friends based on what our brain capacity can handle. So, what do you think the number is for people with disabilities? Anybody? 30? 30? A third. Well, how about a tenth? 15. The average number for people with disabilities to have in their life are 15, according to the studies that Eric and Al and others have done. And many of these people consider friends as the people that are there to help them, people that are paid to be there, paid to take them places, paid to come and help them in their home, that sort of thing. They consider them as friends. They consider the lady at the grocery store as a friend, because they don't really have the large circle that we all have. So stop and think about that. Having a tenth of the people in your life, and how lonely and isolated that can be. So, just to close here, what we found through all these studies is that loneliness kills. People die from loneliness. There's a great story by Gene Miser called Cipher in the Snow. It's an old one about a little boy. Gets off a bus and dies, and he's in the snow, and they're wondering why he died. But when they got digging and finding out he had no friends, he had nobody in his life, he died of loneliness. So, for someone with chronic loneliness, joining a group, according to the studies, will cut in half their chance of dying in the next year, just by joining one group. So if loneliness kills, friendship saves. Baba Ram Das reminds us that we're all just walking each other home. And it's a great sentiment for nurses and teachers and all the people that you guide people along, you help lift them up, you give them what you give, you share your talents, your skills. We're all just walking each other home. It is a gift to have people in our lives. And it's a gift to be in the lives of others. We are a gift to others. We create and build friendships by connecting with the world and people around us. We connect by creating opportunities, by building bridges between individuals and communities to which they hope to belong. In my opinion, transportation, accessible and readily available transportation, more than any other variable, touching on every aspect of life, is the most important bridge between individuals and their communities. If autonomous vehicles are truly the future, let it be the future for everyone. including those of us who see differently, hear differently, get around differently. I'll close with a slide from Michael Graves, a great architect. He said, good design should be accessible to all. So thank you so much.
Thank you for all of that very important information.
Thank you, Lisa.
We're now going to take a 5-minute break where we're going to set the stage for our panel discussion. At this time, please submit any questions you may have by holding up your card, or you can bring it right up to the yellow basket on the console in front. We'll see you back here in 5. Welcome back, everyone. I would like to introduce our panelists who are going to be part of the question and answer session. Our panelists today, in addition to Dr. Molnar and Mr. Wilkins, are made up of 3 additional experts on the topic of mobility and accessibility issues. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Connor Briggs. Connor is the Director of Paratransit Services for Toledo Area Regional Transit Authority, as we all know, TARTA, a native of Toledo and a proud graduate of Toledo Public Schools. His career in transit began as a student bus operator for the University of Toledo before graduating from Ohio University. Connor has served in various management level roles in public transit over the last 5 years. Most recently, he served as the Director of Transit Operations for Butler County RTA in suburban Cincinnati before returning to serve in his home community of Toledo. In his position with TARTA, Connor oversees the TARPS service, which provides over 1,200 trips, that's 1,200 trips every single day for disabled residents of the Toledo community. Next, Ms. Shelley Papenfuse. Shelley is a disability rights grassroots coordinator for state and regional initiatives that involve community building for long-term care services and supports on behalf of persons with disability and public transportation. She is a founding member and facilitator of Community Advocates for Transportation Rights and served 15 years as a Board of Trustees member for the Toledo Area Regional Transit Authority. Shelley is currently the chair of the Public Transportation Committee for the Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments. She has been awarded the 2014 Agency Advocacy Award of the Ohio Association of Area Offices on Aging, 2006 Community Advocacy Award by the Advocates for Basic Legal Equality and the Toledo Bar Association. 2004, the YWCA Milestones Award, a Tribute to Women Education Award. And the annual Student Papenfuse Prize in Disability Writing, named in her honor from the University of Toledo Disability Studies Program, which began in 2016. And next we have Jim Ferris. He's a poet and performance artist. He is author of Slouching Towards Guantanamo, Facts of Life, and the Hospital Poems, which won the Main Street Rag Book Award in 2004. Dr. Ferris, who has a doctorate in performance studies, has performed at the Kennedy Center and across the United States, Canada, and Great Britain. Recent performance work includes the solo performance piece, Scars, A Love Story. Past president of the Society for Disability Studies, he has received awards for performance in mathematics, as well as poetry and creative nonfiction. His writing has appeared in dozens of publications, ranging from poetry to text and performance quarterly, from the Georgia Review to weekly newspapers. He is the Ability Center Endowed Chair in Disability Studies at the University of Toledo. Please join me in welcoming our panelists today. What an impressive lineup. Wow. That is really an impressive lineup, so thank you so much for being with us here today. Let's start with a question, and everyone is more than welcome to chime in when they'd like. What work has been done to make autonomous vehicles accessible to everyone?
Somebody needs to grab the mic there.
Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. What work has been done to make autonomous vehicles accessible to everyone?
Well, actually, that's still undergoing the planning stages as we speak today, and I think very soon we'll see a fulfillment by 2019. Last year, the Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund and the Council on Aging and Disability, along with the Independent Living Research Utilization Center, got together as a think tank, and these are all major institutions that do a lot of policy work and planning that benefit all persons with disabilities in our country. They met with key leaders in the autonomous driving industry, and they got together and made several recommendations, and they basically fall under 3 categories or umbrellas of those recommendations. So I think the first one, of course, was the actual accessible vehicle itself, offering space in the vehicle so that a wheelchair can fit inside a vehicle. So there's enough room, along with a lowered floor, so that a person in a wheelchair could egress into the vehicle, as well as having accessible securement. That would be easy for someone to operate so the chair wouldn't be able to roll around. A second umbrella category was creating a user interface, so a technology that would allow someone to open and close the door hands-free through voice command, or lower windows, or raise windows, as well as offer a screen with large print or better optics for someone with low vision, so that they could see the mechanisms inside if they wanted to change the environment inside the vehicle. And then thirdly, the interface, accessible vehicle, and then providing good orientation for the passenger. And what they're talking about there would be, let's say someone was riding in a vehicle that had a sensory disability, or someone who's in a wheelchair, providing orientation on where the drop-off is, because many times, if you're leaving a vehicle, you also need an accessible stop to roll out or to get out. And so the idea would be to have the technology that the vehicle would communicate what the environment is on the outside. So if there's a barrier outside, or if there's easy access outside, so that there's constant communication going on between the person, the passenger with the disability, and the vehicle. So these are some of the major recommendations that were given to the industries, and we hope that that they are going to be implemented. There's more information under this through the Ruderman Family Foundation report and the National Council on Independent Living report as well, so you could get more information about those details of recommendation.
If I would add, specifically in the sphere of public transit, we're monitoring progress very closely with, how autonomous vehicles are becoming more accessible. Any vehicle that we put out onto the road has to be accessible. So, we're very focused on the future, making sure that we don't fall behind. If this is transportation of the future, we want to make sure we're on the cutting edge of it, but we also need to make sure that we're following the regulations that we need to follow. And as Mr. Wilkins alluded to, it's not just as simple as putting a ramp on a vehicle. We need to make sure that if it is a truly autonomous vehicle, can an individual with disabilities or an individual in a chair of some sort be able to secure themselves? I mean, we struggle with our operators to secure the various types of mobility devices that there are right now. So we want to make sure that any vehicle that we are putting on the road in the future that is fully autonomous is able to adequately perform the duties that we need it to perform.
This is a very broad question. We did touch on it a little bit. But what transportation issues will autonomous vehicles solve? And you know, as we heard, it will solve a number of issues on a number of different levels. And so I think that quite a few of you would be able to answer that question.
Please.
I can start. The question was, what kinds of societal issues can autonomous vehicles solve?
Well, what transportation issues?
Okay. Well, I think, obviously, vehicle automation holds great promise for improving safety and also reducing congestion. But I think along with that, we need to think about how automation will be deployed and what model will be used. And I think the current thinking is that if we simply bring on individual automated vehicles and have people use them in the same way that we've used personal vehicles, that we're not going to realize all of the benefits. So particularly in terms of congestion, which has an important safety component. So most people are thinking that really the goals for the future are not only widely deployed automated vehicles, but shared automation. And I think also, you know, and that has important safety implications as well. That's one.
One of the issues that automated vehicles can potentially help to address has to do with transportation needs, particularly for people with disabilities in rural areas that aren't served by a mass transit district, for example. One of the concerns that people in the disability community have raised has to do with the ways that profit-making organizations have been driving the development of autonomous vehicles significantly so far, and where they're likely to find the greatest profit potential is in urban areas, which winds up running the risk of leaving folks in rural areas behind, you know, not being able to benefit from this, from the promise of this technology.
The most transformative change that would be of huge significance for people with disabilities is that it would allow a greater number of people to participate in the workforce. This is going to create a huge employment opportunity for people in our country, because we are one of the, when I'm speaking we, on behalf of people with disabilities, we are the largest group of people that are unemployed, that are not able to get to work because of transportation. And I don't mean to speak for Connor, but if you were to talk to our manager of TARPS and ask Connor, you know, what is the number one reason people use paratransit in our region, and Connor will tell you it's to get to work. And so that is a huge barrier. Transportation is a huge barrier. I think that this will open up significantly.
The Ruderman Family Foundation white paper that has been mentioned a couple of times so far that was published last year suggests that the employment of people with disabilities in the U.S. with the widespread use of effective autonomous vehicles could rise by 2 million, which is huge. This morning, for example, we're celebrating that the economy added 230,000 jobs last month. We're talking about 10 times that many.
What can Toledo do to not only lead in autonomous vehicle implementation in this community, but to do so in a way that is inclusive of all of our community members.
I'll start on that because, at the Ability Center, we're just about ready to hit our 100th anniversary in 2020. We'll be 100 years old. And so we're already thinking about our next big thing. What are we going to do for the next 100 years? And our goal is that we want to see Toledo and the surrounding area become the most accessible community in America. And so I think to do that, it's going to require this type of technology. To be the most accessible, you have to have housing, you have to have job opportunities, you have to have access to health care and all that we've been talking about, education. And so I think any effort that our public transportation system can provide, to that end, along with smart technologies. We were talking last night at dinner about smart technologies and making Toledo a smart city. I think that, all of that is going to start knocking down some of the barriers that exist out there to a lot of us with disabilities and to people who just don't have transportation for, whatever reason. So I really see, I see autonomous transportation as being, I can't wait for my first ride in an autonomous vehicle. I'll be scared to absolute death, but it'll be great to enjoy. But I think Toledo, to grow and to stay on the cutting edge, needs to be exploring all of these technological advancements. And I think that's, you're already well on the way by this collaboration between UT and AAA in this area. So I'm really grateful to their collaborative effort.
One of the things that we recognize from looking at just the last 40 or 50 years or so of the disability rights movement and the development of greater access and opportunity for people with disabilities is that adaptations or accommodations that provide greater access to people with disabilities wind up providing greater access to everybody.
Everyone, that's right.
Just to look at the curb cutaways as a great example, they were made specifically for people with wheelchairs, and they're mighty useful for everybody else, and the advances that will allow autonomous vehicles to be accessible for disabled people means that they will be more useful for non-disabled people as well. Even as Dan noted, that line between disabled and non-disabled is porous at best.
Mm-hmm. And I think Shelley and I, we both remember way back before in the 80s and pre-ADA when, buses weren't accessible and there was no TARPS, there was no paratransit system. We had to rely on medical companies and whatnot to come grab us. And we even had a transportation system at the Ability Center for a while to help people out. There was a time not all that long ago when we just didn't go anywhere if we didn't have a vehicle.
I believe back in the early 80s, there was only one paratransit bus in the city of Toledo. And your chances of ever scheduling a ride with that one bus was like 1%, because when you called, it was already taken, for that day or the next.
And 1,200 rides a day now.
Yeah.
And we're certainly happy that our ability to provide transportation has grown. We have far more than one vehicle out on the road now. But, we would like to get to the point where, I don't want to. In a perfect world, my position wouldn't have to exist. There wouldn't have to be somebody to oversee 1,200 trips a day. The reliance on the service we provide wouldn't be there. If technology can advance itself to the point where, Shelley doesn't have to schedule a trip a day in advance just to go somewhere. She can decide on a whim that she wants to go meet friends or do whatever social activity that she wants to do. So hopefully that's where this technology is going. And obviously, I'd like to stay in the industry, but I would certainly be appreciative if we were moving in a direction where people didn't have to rely solely on services like the ones we provide and could have more freedom and flexibility to get where they want to go.
And TARDA is going to get into the business of
Yeah.
autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, I think a lot of us in nonprofit, I think our job is to put ourselves out of a job by creating a world that's more welcoming and more accepting and accessible. So I think that's, and you know, we totally understand, you know, 1,200 rides a day, you know, that's tough to coordinate because the idiosyncrasies of the people that you're working with, and on top of that, the idiosyncrasies of each of their disabilities. You know, not everybody with a spinal cord injury is exactly the same. Nobody with CP is exactly the same. Everybody, you're dealing with a lot of individuality and understanding each individual and their needs and the stuff you have to do to get them from A to B. That's not always easy. So I give you props for that.
Dr. Molnar, you were also talking about the aging population, and you know what incredible opportunities this technology can offer for that as well. You talk about the workforce. There are a lot of people who, you know, feel young still, who may be classified as senior, but who could, you know, really benefit from all of this.
I think one of the huge potential benefits for the older population is just helping people maintain mobility. I mean, we know that on average, men kind of outlive their driving career by about 7 years and women by about 10 years. So there's this large period of time when people still need and want to get around, and there aren't good options in many, many communities. We heard this morning that if you're in a rural area, for example, that you have many fewer options. So I think there's great promise, and when I think about kind of the larger context for vehicle automation beyond just the vehicles, I think there's great potential, not just in Toledo, but elsewhere, for really improving what we often call mobility management, so that the coordination and integration between services, because I personally think that automated vehicles aren't going to be the end all. They're not going to be able to meet everyone's needs on every trip. So we're still going to have a family of services, of mobility options that are appropriate for different people and for different trip purposes. And so to have ways to really help integrate and make it easy for aging adults to get the services they need. Mobility management has been proven to be very successful in doing that. So it's kind of like a one call does all, where you can help coordinate even with vehicle automation. I think that may be particularly important for people who are experiencing cognitive deficits. And so just coordinating getting a vehicle to come to the home to the extent that we have shared automated vehicles, helping people get from the home to the vehicle and so forth. So I think there are tremendous opportunities there.
As engineers, how can we design to better include disabled people in the solutions to AV and transportation?
Oh, I think that's an easy one. Involve people with disabilities in your design planning. I mean, really talk to people that are living and breathing it. That's one of the reasons the Center for Independent Living like ours is by law, 51% people with disabilities working there, 51% at least on our board. That's just because when you call there, you want to not just talk to a professional, but you want to talk to an expert. And professionals do it 10 hours a day at the most, but experts are doing it 24/7, 365. So you want to be able to talk to folks and get them involved in the ideas, because if you're not living it, if you're not breathing it, then you're going to step right over the little landing that comes in when you're trying to design a house. You're going to miss things, or you're going to, as I said earlier, do things by assumption. So I think the best thing you can do is get people involved from various types of disabilities, whether it's visual, hearing, whatever. When you're trying to be design specific, get that kind of a person involved in your conversation. It's one of the beautiful things. I love the collaboration we have with the senior design projects. There's several every semester that are disability related. And it's amazing when you get these young minds wrapping their heads around issues that we've had to deal with individually or as a collective for years and years and years. And these young people, not only are they going to come out the other side understanding disability better and more real, they're going to also just expand their mind with regard to the plan A, plan B, the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth right way of doing something. That's what's really important. So yeah, get people involved in your planning as early as possible. I think that's the best way to be successful in the endeavor.
I think the work that's been done so far through the Disability Education and Defense Fund and the National Center on Aging and Disability is so significant and important. But I also think that, as we implement autonomous vehicles and driving regionally, it is going to be very important that you include people with disabilities in your community to be a part of that process, to be a part of that planning process. So that way you'll be able to identify at the outset what works and what doesn't work.
I would just add, building on what Dan and Shelley said, that we need to have more older adults involved in the research. A lot of the research studies on vehicle design and vehicle technology, if they include kind of older adults at all, are often like 55 and above. And we know that 55-year-olds are very different from 75 and 80-year-olds. We know that the older adult segment of the population is the most heterogeneous segment. And so I think we need to do a better job of getting people at all ages along the older adult spectrum involved in the research studies that lead to a lot of the conclusions that are being reached.
So more realistic sampling groups together.
Right now at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute, they are already implementing some protocols using algorithms for their shuttles that would identify a person with a disability out at a bus stop, and also the vehicle would, through voice, speak to the passenger to orient them to where the step is. So if a person's elderly or hard of hearing or has a sensory disability, a visual disability, it would guide them to where that step is. So these are some of the things that they're already testing out.
Dan noted an issue with the ability to lock down chairs in vehicles. Are there other challenges that would be faced by disabled users, and are solutions being worked on?
Well, you were just talking about the DREDF work and all of that. I don't know. That was when Edgar came to me and said, we're doing this, and he got me thinking. I'm thinking, oh, geez, how are they going to do the tie downs? I never really got beyond that with my thinking. If I can get in a vehicle, and like if you looked in my vehicle, I have a tie down. I don't use it. I just live dangerously, but and hold on for dear life. But I'm usually doing the driving. So as I, people think that folks with disabilities.
Any law enforcement out there, please.
Please don't look at the red vans with the Obama stickers. No, I've put over. People wonder, how do you drive? I had a doctor once ask me when I first was meeting with him. He says, "Who's coming to pick you up?" I said, "I drove here." He goes, "You drive? How do you drive?" It's like, I don't know if I want you to be my doctor. You don't know much about spinal cord injury, but I put over 800,000 miles on 3 or 4 vans, and so I'm usually driving. But when I'm not driving, I'm just like in the middle there holding on, and because it's just too much hassle to reach down and do that. But there's things to think about, and I just can't wrap my head around a universal way that a vehicle can pull up and it's going to work for you, regardless of what your chair is like or your ability to tie down. And I would love to see some engineers wrap their heads around that. The totally autonomous lockdown system that's going to evaluate your chair. I've got $6,000 wheels on this chair, and so I don't want them locking down to my. The hand rims have servos in them, so it's a power assist, and that's easily broken, and it's a single bar frame, so there's only one place to grab onto, and so how does an autonomous vehicle figure that all out, and if you happen to have somebody that's a chair user with cerebral palsy and they're nonverbal, well, they're not going to be able to interact with the vehicle much to talk about, more to the left or whatever. So there are some real serious issues to address here, and I just want to hear little engineer brains worrying on trying to figure that out, because it would be great to see that happen. So I don't know if that answered the question or not. Anybody else?
One of the things that hasn't come up yet has to do with making systems that are going to work for people who are deaf or have significant hearing impairments when command systems might be audio-based. So that's another problem that will need to be solved. And I think Dan's right that the ultimate solution is likely going to be multiple vehicles that will work in different ways for different people's needs.
To echo what Dan said and just kind of to reiterate what I had said earlier, that's why in the public transit industry we're watching the advancement of this technology very closely, because our professional skilled operators who go through extensive training on how to properly secure a mobility device to this day, every single day, face a new device they've never seen before, and they have to, rely on their training and their expertise to figure out the best way to secure that device. So I don't have a solution to that. I'm not an engineer, obviously, but it's exciting, and it's at the same time, I'm not sure how we're going to solve that problem of some universal device that can secure anything. But that's why we're watching it very closely and monitoring it very closely, and we're excited to see where it goes.
I think in terms of issues related to aging, there's already a lot of work going on within the auto industry to figure out how to make vehicles more accessible to people who are experiencing, for example, limitations in psychomotor functioning. And so, for example, entry and exit of the vehicle is a huge issue for people who have problems with movement. And so there's work underway to see about different kinds of seat models, swivel seats and things like that. So there's work going on already that, at least with the aging population, I think we can certainly build on. And for much of that work, this concept of universal design does make sense. I think there are areas where it won't. Occupant protection is one where you might have to adjust, airbags for each individual person, but there are things that can be done to accommodate seat belts for different people of different statures and different limitations and so forth.
We were just talking tongue-in-cheek about some sort of vacuum system that just sucks you into place. It's like when I go to my in-laws, I have to sleep in a bed there that's got memory foam, and if I get in memory foam, I'm packed like sardine. I don't move. There's no move. It makes a little dance, says, okay, wrap me up, ship me. But something like that just sucked you right in, and a cone of silence kind of thing, only a cone of safety. Who knows? But there's got to be something.
It was brought up earlier that the wheelchair logo is not all-inclusive. Has there been a proposal for a new logo?
Yeah, actually, I can tell you, I did one that was actually the same blue color and all that, and it was just a big capital A for accessible or accommodating or, oh yeah, come on, you too, whatever. But,
Or aged.
Or aged, yeah. But it's just the blue field that we're so familiar with, and just getting rid of the wheelchair. There's a group in New York that's got the wheelchair guy now. Instead of just the typical stick guy in a wheelchair, they got a guy that's he's moving. So now he's an active guy in a wheelchair. So yeah, he's in a hurry to get somewhere. So, where I got feedback was from friends of mine overseas that said, sorry, but the A doesn't work over here in our language. A doesn't mean accessible. It doesn't. Our word. So it wouldn't be an international symbol then, but we could do something like that. But I think if we were to keep it in the blue field, so you realize that blue color has to do with accessibility. It's like the H for hospital. I think we could do something like that. But we do really need to get rid of that damn wheelchair because it causes so much grief for people. It just really does. That aren't quite disabled enough. Whatever.
Give them time.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that we've talked about throughout this lecture series is that a lot of this, a lot of the advancements are going to come from right here in this region. And Dr. Molnar, you can talk a little bit maybe about, Emcee is one example, but there, not only the development and the research, but the testing is happening here. So we really are in the cradle of all of this technology moving forward.
So in Ann Arbor, we're fortunate to have Emcee, which actually morphed out of the Michigan Mobility Transformation Center, and that's an automated and connected vehicle test bed that allows vehicle testing and more research to be done on a test track that has a low-speed capability. So it has different kinds of roadway features that can be driven on. One of the limitations is that the top speed is about 40 miles an hour, so just about the time you get to that speed, the test track ends. But it does allow you to try out roundabouts and intersections, and so we're actually planning to use that facility to examine issues like trust and acceptance in vehicle automation, in addition to how people actually drive. But we also have in Michigan now the ACM, which is the American Center for Mobility, and that's still in development. It sits on the old Willow Run site. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But the exciting thing about ACM is that that will have a high-speed capability. It will have freeway features and bridges, and so additional testing can be done there. So I think that's really exciting. And then more recently, for those of you who are familiar with 23 north of Ann Arbor, the state has added in extra lanes that are only used during rush hour traffic and other high traffic situations. So when those lanes are closed down, UMTRI, where I am, will now have access to doing testing and research on those lanes using automated vehicles. So that's very exciting for us. So those are the things that I'm aware of, at least in my neck of the woods.
Well, and beyond that, Edgar, you were talking, the state of Ohio is now one of the states that allows for autonomous vehicle testing on our main roads, right? So,
The Turnpike was a big...
right. So again, it is happening right around here.
Thank you so much. Such a fascinating and informative discussion. Thank you so much for all being here with us today. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce AAA Senior Executive Vice President, Edgar Avila.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of AAA and the University of Toledo, we thank the speakers and panelists for their presentations. And of course, our moderator, Lisa Guyton, please join me in giving them a round of applause, please.
Good job, everyone.
Yeah, you too.
And thank you to our audience for attending the 5th Technology Takes the Wheel speaker series of 2018. The motivation to create the speaker series by the University of Toledo and AAA was to bring awareness and to educate the general public about the possibilities of autonomous vehicle technology, what it will offer, including vastly improved safety on roadways and the availability of superior transportation solutions, especially for those who are currently underserved. Another objective of the speaker series was to create a forum for the community, business, and industry leaders who will be impacted by the new technology and to help Northwest Ohio prepare for the changes that will be coming in the near future. The speaker series has indeed elevated the conversation in our community about autonomous vehicle technology this past year. Engagement, collaboration, and new partnerships were formed to pursue autonomous vehicle-related projects. In June of this year, TARTA announced they secured $1.8 million in government funding to operate up to 3 self-driving shuttle buses in downtown Toledo for up to 3 years starting in 2019. In August, Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments, TMACOG, officially formed an autonomous vehicle steering committee to be represented by key transportation stakeholders to develop a plan for the eventual deployment of connected vehicles and autonomous vehicle infrastructure. And in the second half of 2018, TMACOG, AAA, the University of Toledo, Pathmaster, Toledo Lucas County Port Authority, Connect Toledo, and other transportation stakeholders identified 2 autonomous vehicle technology-related projects that Drive Ohio has expressed an interest in supporting. The 2 proposals under development are still in draft form. The first is the I-475 Smart Transportation Corridor project to improve road safety by testing cellular mobile technology that provides real-time information to motorists regarding road construction, work zones, speed limit reductions, road conditions, and accidents. The second is the Downtown Toledo Smart Mobility Project, providing mobile phone applications and smart infrastructure technology to identify parking availability and connections to autonomous and connected shuttle service in the downtown business and riverfront district. This technology will alleviate traffic congestion and provide easier parking and access to special events, entertainment, sports, museums, and restaurant venues along both sides of the downtown riverfront. The engagement, collaboration, and partnerships like those I just described are vital to move Toledo forward. Other cities in Ohio, such as Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland, are well underway developing coalitions and plans to make their cities smart and connected. Toledo must do the same to create a smart and connected landscape that will be attractive to businesses, workers, and tourists that visit our city. That is our challenge as we look into the new year. I am encouraged by the momentum we started this year with our coalition partners, and I'm sure that it will continue going forward to eventually make Toledo a smart and connected city. We hope you found today's seminar informative and that you are excited about the possibilities and benefits that can be achieved through smart technology. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in 2019 at a future Technology Takes the Wheel speaker series.
A heartfelt thank you goes out to our speakers and panelists here at the College of Engineering today. Thank you to the co-sponsors of this series, the University of Toledo, College of Engineering, and AAA of Northwest Ohio. Watch for notification of future seminars coming up in the next year. And if you registered for CPD certificates, please make sure you sign in, and those will be emailed to the address that you provided. So thank you so much for being here today.